Alrighty, here we go. The topic that is on everyone's mind for the 2024 NCAA wrestling season. What the heck is up with the 125-pound weight class? And to be more specific, why are there so many upsets week over week? I firmly understand that normally in week one, there's a ton of upsets at every single weight class. But this weight class has stood the test of time. This weight is like a roller coaster with absolutely no seatbelts, but lucky for us, the wrestling fans are the riders this season. Because despite all the upsets week over week, number one's going down every single week it seems like, I think 125 is easily the most fun weight class to keep up to date with. But before we get too deep into this madness, hi everyone, my name is Tanner, and welcome to TrueTan Wrestling, the one-stop shop for breaking wrestling news, fun wrestling topics, and event recaps / previews. I'm happy to be here with everyone, and if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want a topic covered, or if I miss anything from the madness, which I'm sure I will, because man, this weight is just a roller coaster, be sure to leave a comment in the comment section below. Now, without further ado, let's talk about some NCAA wrestling with the absolute madness at 125 pounds. So, heading into one of my favorite weeks in college wrestling, the very first weekend, one tournament I was really happy to see make a jump back was the Clarion Open, which no shade to that tournament or that program, but that tournament kind of fell off in the past few years in my opinion. But this year, it was a full go, with teams like Purdue returning, some other Big Ten schools returning, Ohio State basically bringing their full squad this year instead of going to the Michigan State Open, which was really awesome. And then there were some EIWA teams that really came to party. On top of all of that, there was some really top high school wrestlers looking to make an even bigger name for themselves on the college scene. The wrestler I am obviously leaning into is Marcus Blaze, who would take out returning NCAA finalist and preseason #1 Matt Ramos in the semifinals. On top of all of that, Blaze had to go out and beat Jack Forrest in the quarterfinals of the Clarion Open, where in the last 30 seconds of the match, he would get a match-winning turn to take out Forrest before setting up his match with Ramos. And then if we want to dive even further into the madness, which I guess is kind of the point of this whole video, Marcus Blaze would go on to lose in the finals to Chattanooga standout Braden Palmer. And sorry for jumping all around and moving ahead a little bit, but Palmer was building a really nice resume this season. But at the Southern Scuffle, he was losing by a good chunk of points to conference opponent from App State, Chad Bellis, in the Southern Scuffle quarterfinals before injury defaulting out of that match. Man, no one is safe at this weight at all, and we are just getting started. Jumping forward a few weeks, I wouldn't say this weight was necessarily calm, but 125 was definitely moving with the generic pack or trend of the weight class. For example, Jacob Camacho of NC State would beat Matt Ramos, but Ramos would beat Anthony Noto of Lock Haven at the All-Star match, so there was kind of sort of a three-way tie for the #1 spot. Man, this weight is just going to be so hard to seed in March. I mean, I guess that's not really my job. My job is just kind of to complain about it when those seats come out, but joking, totally joking. At the same time, building up to CKLV, there was two other wrestlers that were making 125 kind of hard to rank, and those two wrestlers were Virginia Tech's returning All-American Eddie Ventresca and Arizona State wrestler Richie Figueroa. They both made this weight interesting for totally different reasons. Ventresca, as I mentioned, was a returning All-American, but would really struggle in the early quarter of the season. He would drop his first 3 matches of the season, 2 of which were by major decision. Now, none of the opponents he was wrestling were all that bad by any means at all. I would even argue they were pretty good, but it's just very odd to see a returning All-American come out of the gate like this. Then Ventresca would go on to lose his first match at CKLV before declaring later in the season he was suffering from an injury, and Cooper Flynn would jump in, pulling his Olympic red shirt. Hold on that thought with Cooper Flynn, we'll be right back to him. I also mentioned Richie Figueroa when I was talking about the interesting two wrestlers, who at this point of CKLV has not wrestled yet due to some sort of injury that we're not totally sure of. Which does totally stink considering he's been behind Brandon Courtney for one of his years of eligibility, and now he's unable to take the mat. He was a wrench in this weight side for a long time, especially in up to CKLV, because the only data point we really had was him defeating Ramos at last year's CKLV CKLV in the finals, and then his results from the Reno tournament, and then of course his Midland results, which we'll get to, but of course it made it interesting again for rankers. Now back to the topic at hand, and that is the Cliff Keen Las Vegas invite. For starters, this tournament did not mess around this year, and I loved every second of it. Besides Iowa and Penn State, it felt like every big hitter team was here, and it made for an awesome weekend of wrestling. The star of the 125-pound weight class was, of all people, Nico Provo of Stanford, and for being the 9 seed, he essentially came out of nowhere to win this weight and doing it with potentially the hardest route possible. He would add another loss to Ramos's belt in the quarterfinals, along with beating young star Jory Volk of Wyoming, who's a world champion, before taking out fellow scholar Brett Unger of Cornell in the finals. Other notes were Brandon Kaler of Oregon State, who was a 2022 All-American, who lost to West Virginia's Strickenberger and UNC's Moore earlier in the year, but beat Drake Ayala of Iowa right before CKLV, where Kaler would place 4th. D'Agostino, the transfer from Northwestern to Michigan, also put his foot on the line, but had the injury to fall out, which is sad because I feel like when he's really healthy, he's probably one of the biggest favorites at this weight class. But he hasn't been back since a CKLV injury, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Now, I don't want to make this video just a CKLV recap, so I'll move on, but one more thing I wanted to cover was who took 3rd place, which was Caleb Smith of Nebraska, who has made a huge jump since transferring from Appalachian State to Nebraska. He beat Matt Ramos on the backside and Spratley to place at this tournament, before ultimately beating Kaler of Oregon State for 3rd place. Man, oh man, collegiate duels, Midlands, and some winter break duels really took this weight and spit it out, which is crazy to say because it wasn't like it was all sunshine and rainbows before that. There's a lot of places I could start after the Christmas break madness, but I guess the best place to start is with Jacob Camacho of NC State, who was a former ranked #1 wrestler at 125. However, after his collegiate duel performance, he really dropped in the rankings. He dropped matches to Anthony Noto that would give him the #1 spot moving forward. Brendan McCrone of Ohio State would pin him in the first 37 seconds of the match, which would ultimately help Ohio State beat NC State there. And then there was also Trevor Anderson of UNI, who is actually having a pretty good season if you look at it, would also take Camacho out. Not sure if Camacho is still getting over an injury considering he didn't wrestle at CKLV, but he has looked a little off since the Ramos win, unfortunately. Then the Midlands and Scuffle brackets were, well, how do I say this? You know, I'm not going to say anything. I'm actually just going to draw a picture on how not straightforward this weekend was with the Midlands and Scuffle at this weight class. To go in more detail, I guess we'll start with Midlands, or maybe even a little before that. We did see an appearance from Arizona State starting 125, Richie Figueroa. At the Reno tournament, he would lose to Jory Volk in the finals, who also lost to Drake Al at the Soldier Salute, and Noah Certain right before the Figueroa match. Also, excuse me for jumping all around with some guys, it's just, when you get this deep into the season, it's hard not to at this weight class. Like, it's just all over the place. At Midlands, there was also Cooper Flynn of Virginia Tech, who I previously mentioned got his Olympic redshirt pull to be the new guy for Virginia Tech at 125. And before Midlands, and actually pretty close to after CKLV, he would beat the new #1 at the time, Nico Provo of Stanford, who was just coming off a Vegas win. So after that match with Provo, Flynn definitely had some things to prove heading into Midlands and moving forward into the season. And I'd argue his Midlands was pretty good, just not #1 in the country good. He would end up losing to Stanich of Lehigh, who would go on to win the tournament, and then for 3rd place, he would go on to lose to former All-American from Wisconsin, Barnett. And to be honest, I think Flynn's a pretty good candidate to All-American, but it's just so hard at this weight class. I think ultimately the All-Americans are going to be the guys with the best losses, I guess, but it's just so hard to tell because some of these returning All-Americans are losing to guys that you're just like, where did this person come from? But to top it all off with Cooper Flynn, he would go on to beat Noah Cern of Missouri right after Midlands in the duel. And Noah Cern is honestly also building a really nice resume for himself, which I really love seeing because I feel like every year this dude is just so much fun to watch for the Missouri Tigers. Cern's only loss in the season so far is to Cooper Flynn of Virginia Tech, but one of Cern's big wins is over Volk of Wyoming, and he also major Nico Provo of Stanford. Provo also lost another match at the Southern Scuffle to Steve Poland of Northern Colorado, because why not? And then you might think, why isn't Steve Poland number one then? I mean, Big 12 champ and also just beat a former number one. Well, he lost to Strickenberger of West Virginia, who was having a really good season with a lot of really good wins, but then he went 0-2 at Midlands, where one of his losses was to Riders Tyler Kalinske, who recently just beat Rutgers Dean Peterson, who's having a really high-level year and was undefeated, but his best win was against Eddie Ventresca of Virginia Tech, who we all know is having a really rough go at it, and yeah, I think it's time to wrap this stuff up. The most recent madness was another number one going down in Anthony Nono of Lock Haven, losing to number 29 from Harvard, Diego Sotelo. Which, if you look at Sotelo's resume, he has a pretty good season so far. He lost to Unger, Flynn, and Stanich in super competitive matches, and only lost to Ramos in overtime. On that note, I really feel like Matt Ramos is in the center of all this madness. He's like a wrecking ball that lost its chain. Hear me out on this one. Last year, he potentially got one of, if not the biggest upset in NCAA tournament history. I have a theory that when that ref slapped the mat, cementing Matt Ramos into the national finals, the NCAA god said, if you want to play like that, then 125 will be cursed moving forward. So Pat Glory packed his bags, won a national title, and got the heck out of there. But in all seriousness, in my opinion, I think us fans were just so used to Spencer dominating this weight class for the most part, or even guys like Nick Sirianno. It's just weird when you're seeing returning All-Americans, or even All-Americans from a couple years ago, losing to unranked wrestlers, which creates a whole other paradox in the rankings. I mean, even if you really rewind to like the Mega Ludus years, for example, there was upsets, yeah, but those top guys really only beat each other. I don't really know at the end of the day. I still have really high hopes that someone might emerge, but us here at TrueTan Wrestling love storylines and we love upsets, and at the end of the day, we just love great wrestling, so we'll be here for every second of this madness, and dual season is just about to start, and we all know how crazy that can be, especially in the Big Ten. And heck, there's even rumors that Fix and Vito are dropping down to 125, which I'll believe that when I see it, but man, that would just add a whole other layer to this stuff. Well, if you guys stayed for this long, thank you all very much for watching, and I would really appreciate if you would hit those like and subscribe buttons, along with leaving a comment on who you think will win 125. My pick, oddly enough, is probably Drake Al of Iowa. I know he looked off in the early parts of the season and really hasn't wrestled much as some of these other guys, but I think he looks better and better every time we see him, and I think the brands will have him ready in March. I have no real confidence behind that pick, but there it is. Also, if you want a real dark horse, go with Penn State's freshman Braden Davis, who just beat Brandon Kaler of Oregon State. His red shirt isn't pulled yet, but I have a good feeling about it. Alright everyone, that's all I got on the topic, and I hope to see y'all in the next one. Take care everybody. P.S. It feels good to be back.